1, Political Systems, Regimes, and Governments. Topic 1.2, Defining Political Organizations. Again, these videos are for educational purposes only and mirror the AP Comparative Government and Politics curriculum. After this topic, you will be able to define political systems, compare state and governments and regimes, describe nations of people, define legitimacy, and identify the sources of legitimacy. All right. So we're going to start with political systems. And the definition of a political system is a complex organization of people and government making public policy. So PSs, political systems operate in a very specific environment. That would be our political culture. So you think about United States, because we just did U.S. government. So our political system operates in our American democracy with our American political culture that values individualism and values equal opportunity, and it values majority rule, achieving the American dream, right? That's how our political system operates, is in that bubble, okay, of our political culture. So we're going to actually look at the different political cultures and the setups of the 6 countries that we study in comparative to understand in a more deep manner the political systems and how they operate in those countries. The inputs are going to be the demands or the request of the people for change. If we see that there is something we want the government to fix, that's going to be the demand. So you can see that right there. Then the linkage institutions, so the political parties, interest group, the media, elections as well, are going to connect the demands of the people to the officials in the government that have the ability to come up with solutions. And those are the state institutions. Okay, so these are going to be inside the formal political system. These are going to be your branches of government that have to respond to the demands of the people. And then the outputs are going to be the laws and the services created to address the demands of society. So demand of the people, a vaccination for coronavirus, linkage institutions, the executive branch rolling out Operation Warp Speed and trying to produce as many vaccines in a safe and quick manner as possible. And then the actual output would be the delivery of shots and arms. We will see. And the linkage, again, the linkage institutions and the state institutions have to work within the political culture. And we'll, like I said, we'll break that down for our 6 countries. All right. Other terms that we need to know: sovereignty, authority, power. I'm going to start with power because power is the most basic. This is the ability to direct the behavior of others through coercion, persuasion, or leadership. Okay, so you don't necessarily have to have authority or sovereignty to have power. But all it is you getting people to do something they otherwise would not do on their own. Sovereignty is the legal right, the ability to use that power to carry out actions and policies within a territory. So I am sovereign over my classroom. I have the legal right to get you to do what you otherwise would not do within my territory, which is room 13 in Smithfield High School, right? I also have the authority, because I exercise that power on behalf of your learning. And we'll go over and give specific examples of all 3 of those things further into Unit 1. Okay. Another term you need to be familiar with before we move on is state. Okay, state in comparative is country. Okay, it's not one of the 50 states of the United States, but it's actually a country. So the UK is a state. Okay, Mexico is a state. Within Mexico, there are other states, but we now are going to start to call countries states. All right. So a state is a political entity that has the sole ability to use force within its borders. It's more permanent. It only changes when it's attacked or it loses territory. So I used UK right here because let's say the state of the United Kingdom includes everything that you see highlighted here. Now, the state of the UK would change if Scotland or Northern Ireland voted in a referendum to break off and separate from the United Kingdom. Okay, then the state of the UK would change to a lesser Great Britain. Now, to be able to exercise authority, states have to have governments. And those are the people. So governments are the people, like Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister of the UK as of January 22nd, 2021. Okay, so the governments are made up of the people who exercise the authority and the power. Governments are temporary. Okay, they change with elections or revolutions, and we'll go through examples of those. All right, regimes. Regimes is a political system of a state. So a regime is going to be like democracy or authoritarian or a democracy in transition. So here are the different regimes of the world. The pink is going to be authoritarian regimes. The green is a flawed democracy. The blue is a full democracy. And the purple is a hybrid regime. So it's got elements of both democracy and authoritarian in it. So let's go through our 6 countries. So we have Mexico is a flawed democracy. Nigeria is an I'm going to put Nigeria in, because when was this? This is old. I don't really think, I wouldn't categorize, and neither does College Board categorize Nigeria as an authoritarian regime anymore. It would put it as a flawed democracy. UK would be a full democracy. Iran would be authoritarian. China authoritarian. And Russia authoritarian. A regime is going to encompass the rules that states set and follow when they're exerting their power over time. So an authoritarian regime is going to say, all right, we're not going to necessarily protect freedom of the press. That's the rule that we're going to set forward. Regimes endure beyond individual governments or leaders. So just because Putin leaves, I do not anticipate that Russia is going to go through a series of reforms to go to a democracy. All right, that regime is pretty permanent regardless of whether Putin is actually in control of that country or not. So I want you to think of this metaphor. Okay, I want you to look at your phone. Okay, the state is a smartphone. It's something that's tangible. You can touch it. So the state is like the ground that you walk on. The regime is the operating system. So if you have an iPhone, that is your Apple operating system. That's the regime. That operating system is going to last regardless of whether somebody picks up your phone and uses it to make a phone call. So the government is the operator. The smartphone is the tangible item. The regime is what makes that item work, and the operator can change over time. People who operate the political institutions might change, but a regime lasts beyond them. Okay. And then we have the term nations. Nations is a human community with a shared history, culture, and or political identity and ethnicity. Okay. Not all states have common nations of people. Like the United States does not have a common nation of people. Nigeria doesn't have necessarily a common nation of people. It's diverse. There's a lot of different ethnicities within those countries, within those states. Not all nations of people have a state. So we don't study the Kurds, but it's a very good example of this. The Kurdish people are a nation of people, but they don't have a Kurdistan. Not officially. They don't have sovereignty over a particular territory. They are instead spread out over a bunch of different countries, including Iran, which is one of our required countries to study. Okay, and nationalism is also a term that's going to come up again and again. It's a common political identity, and that's the nation of people. Nationalism are going to connect. All right, the last term I want to introduce you to is the term of legitimacy. Legitimacy is a government's authority to use power to enforce their policies and nations, and it is the people's belief that that government, that regime, that political system actually has the right to rule over them. Okay, so people accept the government's authority to make policy. There's a couple of different sources of legitimacy that I'm going to introduce you to, and we're going to get into it in more detail once we get to topic, I think, 1.8. So there's traditional legitimacy, that people believe that the rulers have the right to have power and legal authority over them because their status is connected to old customs. So you see that like with divine rights of kings. You have charismatic legitimacy or personality cult, where a dynamic personality of a leader has captured the loyalty of the people. And that is very common after revolutions. You see it with Mao Zedong in China after the Communist Revolution in 1949. You see that with, the first Ayatollah after the Islamic Revolution in Iran in 1979. Okay. Then you have rational legal legitimacy, and this is like constitutional legitimacy. It's based on well-established laws and procedures, and the people have entered into a social contract with their government because they know the government's going to do what's best for them and they're going to follow the laws. Now, of the rational legal, there are two types of rational legal. There's common law, and then there's code law. And you can have a combination of the two. So common law is going to be based on traditions and legal precedents set in the courts. Code law is going to be what's like written down based on statutes and a constitution. All right. So in our government, in the United States government, we have common law and code law. We have a constitution, but we also follow the precedent set by the Supreme Court in decisions like Brown v. Board. Oh, I'm sorry. So let's look at some of those. I thought we were done, but I'm going to go through some of these. So let's look at some of the examples of the AP6. So Mexico's regime was established by revolution and a constitution in 1917. The regime type is transitioning from authoritarian one-party dominant rule to a illiberal democracy to more democratic through a process called democradora. You have, and then in Mexico, an example of government change was President Peña Nieto, who served out his six years as a PRI to President Obrador by popular election, the Morena Party. All right, Nigeria. Regime change. There's a history of military coups, but there's an established constitution in 1999. The regime type transitioned from authoritarian to illiberal democracy to democratic. Government change, we see an example of that when President Goodluck Jonathan hands over power to President Buhari by a popular election in 2015. UK, by tradition, all the way back to the Magna Carta in 1215. Regime type is a liberal democracy. And when I mean liberal, I mean that it's a healthy, not like, oh, there are a bunch of Democrats, but it's a healthy democracy. Illiberal democracy means it's on its way there. It's not quite there. It's a little sick still. So that's how I remember. Like, it's a democracy that's still a little sick, ill, right? Government change, Prime Minister Theresa May to Prime Minister Boris Johnson by voluntary resignation. And let's look at some of the authoritarians. So Russia, established by Constitution in 1993, but it is authoritarian. President Putin kind of set up power for President Medvedev in 2008 and then came back into power, and we'll go through all of that rigmarole. Iran, by revolution and constitution in 1979, but it is authoritarian. We do see a government change when President Ahmadinejad is no longer serving as president, and President Rouhani took the office in 2013. China, talked about the 1949 revolution, set a constitution. That's really the communist or Chinese Communist Party handbook. It's their constitution, more or less. It's authoritarian. We see a government change with President Hu to President Xi by party mandate in 2012. All right, that is it.